Yeah, and I'd like to, welcome everybody to our unbelievably, like 45th college reunion. It's funny when I think back to our past reunions, I actually focus on, a memory device, figuring, I think about where we held it, and that, from then I can figure out where we were. If you recall, our 40th, we were in Butler Library. 35th, we were in Kent Hall. 30th, we were on South Field under a tent. 25th, as you recall, we were in the rotunda at Low Library, which, by the way, we celebrated with Henry Coleman's class, which was really special for us. And on our 20th, we were in the large faculty room in Low Library, which we had Professor Jim Shenton, as our guest speaker. Before we begin this program, though, I really would like to thank everybody who participated in the reunion committee. It gave us a chance not only to plan for this event, but to get kickstarted and a head start on the reunion by planning many events, during the course of the year. And I would especially like to thank two of our classmates who really stepped up, spent an extraordinary amount of time working and planning, going above and beyond, and made this entire reunion happen. That's John Connell and Ken Howard. John had the additional responsibility of being the class agent, leading the fundraising effort for the alumni fund, and doing a terrific job. At the beginning of the year, we set a couple of goals, and I have some statistics from late last night. We set a goal of $250,000 in unrestricted dollars. We're over 70% there, just $190,000. We set a goal of 95 donors in our class. We have 99, so we're above what our goal was. And we set a goal of 30 John Jays, and we're 70% there, with 21. And we have another 28 days to go in this fiscal year, in the academic fundraising year. And I think the best way we can thank John for his efforts is to contribute to the fund. If you haven't, please do. If you have, please consider an additional gift, and I plan on doing that. And I would especially like to thank Ken Howard for all of his efforts in bringing us together. What really has been a difficult year, I think, for all of us. We saw each other more this year in class-related events than in any other reunion year. And that was due really to the efforts of Ken. Many of the events that we held, particularly the last few, turned to a reflection of what Columbia meant to each of us. And there were a lot of personal, poignant, and thoughtful comments by many of our classmates. And in the past, I thought of this, very simplistically, I do what I do. I'm a corporate lawyer because of Columbia. This year, though, through the events that Ken organized, it made me think deeper about my Columbia experience and what it meant to me. And it changed my perspective. I do what I do because of Columbia to I am who I am because of Columbia. And it runs from the personal, I've met my wife of, nearly 44 years, at Columbia. All of my well-educated, intelligent kids spent either college or graduate school at some point on Morningside Heights. My best friend is my common 7th floor common hall roommate, Doug Newman. To seeing all of you guys, I regret that we have to do it through a screen, but I really enjoy the in-person. I think every time we've met, whether it's been in reunion events or during just ad hoc organized events, it's just been a lot of fun. To my enjoyment of arts and music, if it weren't for art humanities and music humanities, I probably wouldn't have been interested. And even to my thinking process, which was, really trained and molded by the Columbia education, the core curriculum, and just our discussions that we had in hallways of our dormitories, on College Walk and the Gold Rail or the West End. For crying out loud, I even found beer at Columbia during college. I mean, that was and without that, I wouldn't be who I am without Columbia. And that brings us to our guest speaker tonight. When you look up Columbia, just go online, look up Columbia. There's a description that you see in a lot of places. Columbia is a private Ivy League research university in New York City, ranked among the top universities in the world, known for its unparalleled diversity, outstanding faculty, and one-of-a-kind core curriculum, which represents a way of thinking. It should go on to say, and is epitomized by the intellect and passion for education embodied by Dean Roger LaHecka. Dean LaHecka was in the class of '67. He didn't wait to graduate from college to contribute to education. While an undergraduate, he founded the Double Discovery Center, which is a major tutoring and mentoring center for disadvantaged students in New York, a center that is extraordinarily active even today, over 55 years later, and has made college access and success reality for over 15,000 disadvantaged students. It's phenomenal. After graduating from graduate school, Dean LaHecka joined the dean's office in 1975, just before our senior year, when he was named assistant dean of students. And many of us got to know him our senior year, 75, 76. He was then named dean of students in '79, succeeding Henry Coleman, a position which he served until 1998, when he became director of alumni affairs and special advisor to the dean. Under Dean LaHecka's leadership, Columbia increased its graduation rate from 75% to over 90% in just a few years. He transitioned the college to co-education and became in the school, under his tutelage and leadership, one of the very highest ranked colleges in the country. And I think we all benefit now from just being alum from Columbia. Dean LaHecka will never retire from Columbia. He teaches, he's involved, he keeps Columbia going, he is Columbia. I started this introduction by stating that Dean LaHecka epitomizes Columbia. And after I put together my thoughts, I was going through some old Columbia College Today articles, which quoted Lee Bollinger at an event honoring Dean LaHecka, stating that Dean LaHecka defines Columbia. So whether Dean LaHecka epitomizes Columbia or defines Columbia, whatever it is, you can't mention Columbia without mentioning Dean Roger LaHecka. And I am extraordinarily proud to introduce Dean LaHecka and to turn this over to him.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure I can do justice to an introduction that was that kind and generous. I've been around Columbia so long, Steve, the only thing you left out is that I was Alexander Hamilton's advisor. But I really appreciate that, and thank you very much. I also want to thank Moselle Thompson and Ken Howard. They had a lot of patience with me as we figured out a suitable subject for this discussion after your class invited me. And it's wonderful to be here, even virtually, but it's painful not to be able to chat with many of you one-to-one as we could have done if this reunion were in person. And I'm counting on being able to do that with many of you well before you're on campus for your 50th. And this hour is meant to be primarily discussion, including all of you, about the stated topic, what endures from your Columbia College education. But I'd like to talk for 10 minutes or so about why I suggested that subject. Education in the United States, except perhaps the most technical or professional, is traditionally seen as having three goals: economic advancement, encouraging students to grow into a full civic life, and the third is personal growth. I doubt that I need to say more about the economic advancement goal. Graduating from Columbia, from an Ivy League college, gives one a brand, an endorsement, It opens doors, it leads potential employers to make certain assumptions about you. The place of school, college in particular, and educating citizens, though, goes all the way back to the 17th century in the American colonies, and is still, at least rhetorically, important. But what should a college do in this regard, especially when the college expects its graduates to be leaders, models of good citizenship, people who shape the world in above average ways? What substantive knowledge does this require? What attitudes, what values, sensibilities go with a responsible civic life? As for the third goal, personal growth, this can include a wide range of things, from aesthetic appreciation to moral standing, moral points of view, moral living, to a choice of a profession or calling. And again, the question is, what should a college do along these lines? What can it realistically do? And what gives it the right to do any of these things? Now, you were all in college when Peter Pouncey was dean. His 4 years as dean coincided with your 4 years of students. And you heard from him many times about the meaning of a Columbia College education. As I recall, he rarely spoke about the economic goal, but he could bring even the most jaded sophomore to tears talking about the other two. Every liberal arts college in the country would include these three goals in its self-description. But outside of Columbia College and a handful of others, those colleges have very little they can show that connects what they teach to the non-economic goals. The Columbia College core gives real meaning to those non-economic missions that we have. So as you've heard, as you know, I've been at Columbia most of my adult life. I even teach in the years since my retirement from administration. I've paid close attention to changes in higher education in the 58 years since I entered as a freshman. I've observed a significant shift in the priority given to the three goals in public discourse over those years. Certainly outside Columbia, there's much more emphasis on the ability of a college education to offer economic rewards, and a diminished emphasis on civic engagement and personal growth. Even at Columbia, perhaps in response to what young people and their parents want to hear, there's attention to economic rewards or their surrogates like networking that I don't remember hearing when I was a student or when Peter Pouncey was your dean. Now, this is not to prove that this change occurred, but to give an illustration of how the discourse has changed. Let me describe two documents, each ostensibly about justice and equity in education, with two very different views on the value of education. The first document I'd cite is last month's report of the Gates Foundation's Post-Secondary Value Commission. It sounds, I don't know how they make up these names. It's as though they're trying to put you to sleep, but it's important to note the word value in that commission that's worked for 2 years and produced a report last month, which obviously gets lots of attention because everybody knows the Gates Foundation is serious with a capital S. So this Post-Secondary Value Commission produced this report. Now, you might have a number of things that you believe should be in a list of the values of college, but the bulk of this report, and pretty much 100% of the publicity about the report, are about the economic value of higher education. Those economic benefits are the value of education for this report's authors. The worthy goal of this commission was to show that while higher education is extremely important to financial success in adult life, access to that higher education is not equitable, and differential access to the institutions near the top of the prestige hierarchy makes inequity even more extreme. So the report itself and the way it was reported on makes it clear that what really matters about college is its economic payoff for the individual. The report does have a chapter about the economic returns to the country as a whole by having more people attend college. And that chapter comes before the chapter on the non-economic benefits of college. But the tables with economic outcomes got all the media attention, and the way the report was written and the premises on which it was based made that inevitable. The Gates Foundation paid little attention to the wise saying, not everything that can be counted matters, and not everything that matters can be counted. So that's one document from the very recent past. The second document, I could have picked that. I want to show how different the discourse is about education today than it was decades ago. And I could have picked lots of documents, but I went for one from 1954 because that's when many of you were born. And what I picked was the decision of the Supreme Court, a unanimous decision in the Brown versus Board of Education case about de jure school segregation. It was a unanimous decision, but here's how an excerpt from the decision that shows how they viewed the value of education in 1954. Today, this is from the document, so today is 1954. Today, education is perhaps the most important function of state and local governments. Compulsory school attendance laws and the great expenditures for education both demonstrate our recognition of the importance of education to democratic society. It is the very foundation of good citizenship. Such an opportunity where the state has undertaken to provide it is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms. Democracy, citizenship, not a word about the economic effects of education. We all used to talk about education in that way at every level, in that broader way, linking education to democracy and citizenship, to use two words from the Brown decision. Now, the public discourse is all about the financial benefits of education. I'm not dismissing the importance of what the Gates Value Commission, it's hard to say Gates Value Commission seriously, but that's what it's called. I'm not dismissing the importance of the commission, what it says about financial inequities that are the consequence of educational inequities. I teach a course about that subject and I take it very seriously. I am challenging the shift in public discourse away from the civic and personal benefits of education. And here's another example from even further back. This is from W.E.B. Du Bois in 1903, from The Souls of Black Folk. He wrote, "The true college will ever have one goal, not to earn meat, but to know the end and aim of the life which meat nourishes." The true college will ever have one goal, not to earn meat, but to know the end and aim of the life which meat nourishes. That's a very different vision from the vision of what education is 120 years later in the United States. To bring this back to Columbia, we are lucky to be alumni of a college that takes all of those educational responsibilities seriously. One thing I want to get at in this discussion, though, as any teacher knows, when you say you're teaching X, that's not the same thing as knowing that the students are learning X. Sometimes you're teaching X and the students are learning something very different. They may learn that the whole subject you're teaching is boring. They may, who knows what they learn. But teaching is not the same thing as knowing learning is going on. Now, I could go on at length about what I think our core curriculum is supposed to accomplish, or what goals a true college should have in the area of character development, subject where I'd be even an outlier at Columbia. And if you ask me the right questions, I'll go on at length about those things, but I'm curious about what you still have from your Columbia College education. My guess is you don't reread Plato's Republic regularly. You don't consult Locke's treatise, second treatise of government, when you ponder public issues. Maybe you haven't recently read the Iliad or the Inferno. But did your CC course have any effect on how you see your civic responsibilities? The things you read there? Is the reading you do now, the music you listen to, the art you seek out any different than it would have been if you'd gone to Brown or Dartmouth? Did your academic work or your contacts, in fact, make your economic life more secure? Is it the friends that endured, the skills you learned in your publications or theater group or team? Did you change your view of yourself, your talents, your ambitions, your obligations to others? If so, what about Columbia allowed or encouraged you to change in that way? I'll give you one more quotation from an ancient person, Alfred North Whitehead, a philosopher and mathematician. I couldn't find the exact quotation, but he said something along these lines. He said, liberal education is what remains after you've forgotten the facts that you learned while becoming educated. With that as a prompt, I'd like to hear from you about what endures. And if we get somewhere with that, there are lots of other things we could talk about.
So there are two ways that we can do this, guys. We can either open it up so everybody can ask a question and we just have a giant scrum, or you can post your questions into the chat box and I'll read questions that you guys post. Now, the advantage of doing that is I don't have any questions other than the very first one because I'm reading all of your questions. And I think after a year of me hosting these things, you guys are kind of tired of me. So you guys choose what you want to do. If you know, down in the bottom, there's a hand that you can put up for reaction, under reaction. So you can put a hand up, a thumbs up. If you want all the mics unmuted, Michelle's happy to unmute all the mics. She's the one in charge right now. So let me know. Roger, while we're waiting for them to figure out where the reaction icons are, I just have one thing to tell you. You missed the session we had on a Sunday afternoon where Tomas Hendrik Ilves joined us. And he actually reflected on something that you just mentioned. And John, if you can, or Moselle, if you guys can help me out, I believe what he said when he talked about being involved in politics in Estonia, that what it gave him the great advantage was in Eastern Europe, they don't study Western civilization. And that the single most important thing he learned at Columbia was from CC in order to become president of Estonia. Is that about right, John?
That's exactly right. Yep.
So I was wondering what your reaction was. You're smiling, so I think you're glad he said that, but I was just curious what you thought.
This is not a serious response, I'm afraid, but it reminded me of when, I think it was 1982, Columbia soccer team went to the NCAA finals. It was playing Indiana for the national championship. And a reporter came to me from the New York Times and asked who I thought was going to win. And I assumed that I was supposed to be a little jocular, not serious about this. I said, well, Columbia is going to win, of course, because you have two great teams. They've had great seasons, but all the Columbia students have read the Iliad, so they know more about combat than the Indiana students. And that didn't go over well in Indiana. I hate mail. They had pictures. They burned effigies of me in the locker room for the final. I think the president of Estonia, your classmate, had a better line than I did. He certainly had extraordinary responsibilities, and he's quite a guy.
Dan, you got a question? Dan Baker, I think you can they unmute now, Michelle, or not?
No, I didn't have a question. I was just going to say that having an effigy is a certain level of celebrity. And that was all I was just going to say. I bet most of us have not been or been any part of an effigy. So I thought Roger should be flattered somehow that there was an effigy there. That's all I was going to say.
Well, I have honors like that closer to home. Like the student I disciplined one year who said he wanted to contribute to Columbia to name a urinal in Hamilton Hall after me. That was another form of recognition I got.
Yeah, I've heard worse.
Wonderful memories of most students. I shouldn't joke about this. And your class was quite something. So.
Roger, I have a question for you that goes back to the position you held from 1979 to, into the 2000s, which is having been very, very fond of Harry Coleman and hearing his stories of Nicholas McKnight, one of your predecessors as well. Nicholas McKnight was the longtime dean of students at Columbia. I was curious how much mentoring within the administration has impacted your career, the people that you followed and the examples you followed.
Well, Harry Coleman was was an important mentor to me and an example in many ways I did follow, which was ironic because, at that time, you guys may remember I had long hair. I was had particular political points of view. Harry had a crew cut, had been the crew coach. He was a much more conservative guy, but he, in personal ways, made an enormous difference to me that I hope I was able to pass on to others after me on the dean staff. He was a father I never had in certain ways. You may also remember it was before you guys arrived in 1972, when he was shot in his office. I pitched in and did his work for the summer, which is, I always figured is why he pushed for me to succeed him when he did retire, because all the other people in the dean's office were too afraid and ran away, wouldn't come to the office. So,
Roger, when we were in our freshman orientation, I remember in Woolman Auditorium, Harry standing in front of the class with his arm in a sling.
In a sling, yeah.
And he got up and he said, the first thing I'd like to tell the incoming students and their parents is that St. Luke's has one of the finest emergency rooms in the world. And that was his sense of humor. I mean, I'm glad we're talking about him a little bit.
Yeah, well, he was shot 5 times by someone who was 6 or 8 feet away from him, and several of those bullets an inch over in a different direction would have killed him. And the fact that he was alive was a miracle. His wife was very annoyed that he came back to work at the end of the summer,
Right.
because most people would not have done that, but Harry was that kind of a guy. So, we're always temperamentally different, but both loved Columbia, were committed to Columbia, and he showed me how to do that in an unembarrassed way.
It's remarkable just the tenure of the dean of students. You, Henry Coleman, and his predecessor went for an awfully long time. Dan Baker reminds me, Ted Williams, Kyle Yastrzemski, and Jim Rice in left field.
Yeah, well, Harry arranged once for Nicholas McKnight and us to be together at a homecoming event and have our pictures taken, because we were the only 3 people with that title. After I left, the title was different. Between McKnight and Coleman, the title was different. I never knew McKnight, but I have to say that some of the things I read in student files when I was a dean from people from his era who would come back and try to get their degrees after decades of, not quite making it. McKnight unfortunately embodied some of the bigotry in the country that we still see in many places, but he exhibited at Columbia something I never saw from Harry.
Hey, Roger, you just said something that I don't even know what it was referencing, and I have no sense of what you were talking about. Could you say a little bit more about that, especially in the time we're living, and I could see where that was going?
You mean about McKnight?
About McKnight and having some positions that we might not approve of right now.
I can't say much more about it because I don't want to violate I don't want to say enough specifics so that someone could identify. I have no idea what his political points of view were, but I could have guessed what they were. But remember, he started at Columbia at a time when Columbia was trying to keep Jews out of the college. And seems to me he wanted to keep lots of immigrant kids out of Columbia
Okay.
College and didn't see them as belonging there in a variety of ways. He just spoke in ways about students that were not. If someone on my staff wrote that kind of note about a student conversation, I would have fired the person.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't mean to put you on the spot. That's completely, for all the things I think I know about the college, that's just a little piece I didn't know. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, well, it's, he was, I think he stopped being dean of students before I was born. So, it's
Good.
One of the students from his day who I got to know was someone who didn't graduate because he didn't pass the swimming test. And I got a visit in my office one day from his son, who was also an alum, but son was a little bit older than I was. And the son explained to me he didn't pass his swimming test. He wanted to get his degree. He was very old, close to death, and could we do anything about it? So we waived the swimming test, and this guy brought his father into the dean's office. And I had to pretend I was the dean, who wasn't there at the time, because his father only knew the main dean's office. So I pretended I was the dean, and he kept talking about the man who was the dean of the college, not the dean of students, Harry Carman, a name you know because many of you lived in Carman Hall. And he kept, the father we got him the degree just in time. I handed him his diploma. But he kept asking me if I knew Dean Carman, who was such a great man. Dean Carman died before I was born. But we made one person happy by waiving the swimming test there. Did no one any harm. It was too late for him to drown. He died of natural causes in that way. But I see Thomas Motley has something in the chat box.
Sure.
So maybe we can shift back to the subject because Thomas is a serious guy.
Yeah, he wrote, I don't know if you have access to it, Dean, but he wrote, I thought that the Prince was extremely important in understanding the last presidential administration. For that, I was extremely grateful to my Columbia education. And that was probably most, applicable to, 2016 to 2020.
Yeah. I doubt that Donald Trump read The Prince.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure he understood The Prince that well. Prince is a much more complicated book than most of us give it credit for. It certainly has a lot of the cynical approaches that we associate with bad politicians and bad public leaders, but it was written at a particular time with a particular purpose, it's not that I want to approve of Machiavelli and all the things he wrote, but it isn't fair to him to associate him with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
That's all I would say there.
In bursting the myth of Tom Motley being a serious person, his next comment was, the allegory of the cave was enlightening. See College Walk and Ghostbusters and other movies has always excited me. And I was fortunate to have Roger LeHeck as my pre-law advisor. Thank you. So I'm along with Tom. One of the most memorable movies I ever saw was Ghostbusters as well. So with Daryl Hannah,
the focus there on the allegory of the cave. Obviously, you have not reread the Republic recently.
I think the only Ivy League student who read less than me was Donald Trump. Actually, there is a serious question.
Well, let me, if I could speak in my defense, I did not think Donald Trump himself had read it or understood those, but his handling of his office and those around him and how he pushed the public and moved the public back and forth, and how he demonized people and all that. Because I thought, how the heck did we get in this position? And then I remember, that's why we're reading the Prince, so we wouldn't be in this position.
Yeah.
But at last we are, or we were.
Well, maybe the answer is that more people should read the Prince, because there are more voters than there are Columbia alums. Dwight Eisenhower went from being president of Columbia to being president of the United States. And you're not old enough to remember, but I was old enough to remember the campaign in 1956 when Eisenhower ran against Adlai Stevenson. And Stevenson was, I think, with some Columbia people and who were happy that Eisenhower was no longer president of Columbia, because whatever they thought of him as president of the US, he wasn't a very effective university leader. And so this group said to Stevenson, all the smart people in the country are going to vote for you. And his response was, yeah, but I want to win. But let me, this does get to a different question, which is, how are young people supposed to be educated properly about civic life, about what their responsibilities are, about what they know? I mean, Thomas, you've spent time in public life and in serious positions. Do you have some thoughts about how beyond Columbia civic education should take place so that events like that are less likely to occur in what we had the last 4 years?
I remember when I was in high school, and this even before I went to high school up in New Hampshire, I was an inner city school in Washington, D.C., and it was Calvin Coolidge. And they had a book on civics and would teach you about what was going on and what your responsibilities are and how the system works, et cetera. I doubt if they do that anymore, but it was the civics book that you had. And even though it may teach the fundamentals, you find that people don't know the fundamentals or don't understand the fundamentals. And it's not given broadly to the American public. It's almost like you see all the surveys and how little the people know about how our government works, how we do things. Yet many people go out and vote and don't understand how things run. And I fear that we have given up some of those basic lessons that I had in 1970 at Calvin Coolidge High School, because that was just something that was taught. So I don't know how others feel about that, but that's sort of my view, is that we don't say, hey, this is an important lesson on how we analyze those things, which is almost what he's about when we got there.
But you could know all those facts about the three branches of government and how members of each are chosen and what their responsibilities are. You could memorize the Constitution. But it seems to me what we were missing also was not that knowledge. It was a sense that we have some common purpose and that political activity is not just for us to get ours and to keep others from getting theirs, because that's going to be at our expense. And that's an outlook, not a bit of knowledge. And one of the things I'm saying, in order is what should a college be allowed to say along those lines? What should it be teaching its students, or a public high school for that matter, about their responsibility as citizens?
What's hard here is this. I remember when I got to Washington my education taught me, at Columbia, taught me the value of critical thinking and to value different ideas and points of view, and being able to evaluate them in order to determine what my own views were. I remember when I first got to Washington, a senior official who had been very experienced, he pulled me into his office and said, you know, Moselle, the problem that you have is that you are trying to find the truth, but most people around here only want to hear about their truth, and that's it. And it was very enlightening. I mean, it was a wake-up call. Now, that didn't stop me from still endeavoring to find what the right answer was. But on the other hand, it's too easy right now to create your own bubble for yourself and surround yourself with people who just echo what you think and what you say. That's a real challenge for all of us. And I think that people view now a contrary opinion as a threat instead of something that people should think about. And when I think about the assumptions that we had at Columbia, you know, part of when you were talking earlier is we had an assumption through all of that, that learning more was better, hearing more was better, that more information was better than less information, and that if you had those tools, you would do better in the world, that you would be more successful in the world. And I think when you talk about the Gates study, talking about economics, I think it sort of highlights what a lot of people, a lot of kids are thinking now, is that those assumptions that we made aren't necessarily true. That you could be a critical thinker and be learned and thoughtful, but it still may not be helpful to you. And that's especially true for people of color, because you could do everything right and still lose. The fact that I, at this age, day and age, am still afraid of the police, and the fact that I get stopped every 18 months on a regular basis asking if my car is mine is really pretty outrageous, notwithstanding everything else that I've spent my time with. So that's what's kind of scary. And that's sort of, when you talk about what the Columbia education has done for me, it's allowed me to put that in context and say, well, you know, I understand the value. If more people had that education, would we be better off? I try to say yes, but I also realize there are a lot of people out there who would say no.
No. But Moselle, again, you're talking about knowing things, and you're talking about the way knowing things, I mean, this isn't all you talked about. I mean, the personal experience of the police, but you know, that knowing more is better. Who could, you know, it's hard to argue about that. But that the knowing more is to help you succeed in life. And my question is, where, you know, you're not giving yourself enough credit. You also approach these things, not what's the truth, but you weren't always looking for what was going to make your life more successful or better. You were thinking in a larger way. And how do people learn that? Because without that, knowledge isn't going to be enough to make this a place we want to live. Did you get that from Columbia? Did you get it from, I mean, you probably got it from your parents, not from Columbia.
Also, a little bit of what I also learned.
Moselle, your speaker, your mic is bad. No.
Yeah.
What I also learned from Columbia is
It's this internet connection.
Yeah. the last time we had this problem, Moselle, you logged off and came back and it got fixed. So,
Well, the problem is I'm in Delaware. And
oh,
so
Real quickly, though, I wanted to switch to one thing. John Healy asked a really interesting question that is, which is kind of interesting here. He said that acceptance rate, according to Dean Valtini, is 3.45% or so. And his question is, this is the most selective ever. Is that a potential threat to the Columbia we knew?
I think that's a threat to higher education more generally, not to Columbia in particular. This frenzy about having a lower and lower acceptance rate is a form of collective insanity. I mean, let's just talk about the Ivy League colleges as a group. They don't need to be taking that lower percentage of students to have a terrific student body. But if any single college in the Ivy League said, we're going to go out and tell candidates for admission that half of you don't have a chance, please don't apply, save yourself the application fee, save yourself the anxiety, save your parents all the problems. Let's just focus on the students we're most likely to take. And I mean, let's talk about Princeton instead of Columbia. If Princeton did something like that and they cut their application numbers in half and ended up with exactly the same class they would have had otherwise because they discouraged the weaker candidates from applying, Princeton would be seen as a failure, even though they had the same student body, and their admissions dean would be fired. So, I mean, every college has to keep at this and generate more applications and more applications in a way that's destructive of the moral fiber of the place. The Ivy League had great students when it had a quarter the number of applicants we have now, or a third the number of applicants we have now. Now, does Columbia have more applications of high quality than when you were students? Yes, because you were all male. So they've doubled the applicant pool that way.
And also, we were the class of 76, of course. Much better applicants after us.
You were a great class. I mean, look, whether the admissions office did the right thing and who they admitted and whether they made wise decisions, now we know. Look at you guys, they made the right decision. But this business of trying to drive down the admissions rate to stay ahead of the next college, in my opinion, is nuts. It's destructive. It hurts applicants. It hurts their families. And it makes the admissions officer's job practically impossible. And it reinforces the notion that the decisions they make are arbitrary rather than thoughtful. Because if you have this many applicants, how much time do you have to actually give to them? You could get rid of half the applicants because they're not qualified and pick the rest by chance, and you might have a perfectly good class without that. If the dean were talking to the freshmen, if I were the dean and talking to the freshmen who come in the fall, I would say not, you're amazing because you were one, we only admitted 3%, 4%. So there were 24 people rejected for every one of you here today. Aren't you great? The honest thing to say is to the incoming freshmen is, you are so lucky because we had 5,000 people we could have admitted who were just as good as you. And we picked you, we used our best judgment. We try to figure out this, that, and the other thing. We'll put together a good class, but you're lucky you were in that group because there are lots of other people just as good as you who didn't get in. But nobody's going to say that because it would undermine things. I think it's bad for Columbia. It's bad for colleges like Columbia to do this. I mean, I have a former mentee who went to Barnard, somebody I knew from her high school years because I was an advisor to her. She was a first generation college goer, low income kid, ended up at Barnard, graduated, worked in the Barnard admissions office and Dartmouth admissions office. She just left that job because she said she was tired of being a rejection officer. She wasn't an admissions officer, she was a rejection officer. It was demoralizing experience because of how things work day to day in that work now. I don't think this is a good situation, and the problem is that to fix it, you need to have collective action so that no college is left out to dry. Because as I say, whether it's Princeton or Harvard, I mean, any college that did an honest job now of trying to limit the number of applicants so that they wouldn't be disappointing so many people would be seen as a failure.
Roger,
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to ask one thing. Michelle has given us permission to go to 8:15 if you're willing. So I just want to make sure we're not interrupting, I don't know if you watch Chris Hayes All In or whatever you watch on TV at night.
I never watch television. I'm missing the mayoral debate, but I've already missed that. And I thought it was only 7:30. I can't believe it's 7:55. So sure, I'm willing to stay.
Okay, so there's one thing that as a class, since we feel we're special, that we did. We arranged a slight segment of entertainment in particular for you. So Michelle, I don't know how you're going to do this, but it sounds great. So what we arranged to do was to have the Kingsmen come on and entertain you with a Columbia song.
All right, so they've been let in, so we'll give them 1 second to get organized and then let them take it away.
You want to ask if they can hear us? Everything okay? Yeah, can you hear that? Can everyone hear that?
We can hear you, yep.
Right. Okay. What if tomorrow brings sorrow or anything other than joy? What if the wintry chill, rainstorm or summer's thrill? Tomorrow's the future still. This is today. One last toast ere we part, written on every heart. This motto stay. Long may Columbia stand, honored throughout the land. Our alma mater grand, now and forever. Our alma mater grand, now and forever.
Anybody in the mood for Roar Lion Roar? Can we ask for one more? Or you guys don't know that song?
Hey, I think we could pull that out of our back pocket. We might know a little bit of it.
And feel free to join in also.
In the bold days of old, correct?
That's the one.
New lion roar. When the bold teams of old wore the blue and white, deeds of fame made their name here at Old Columbia. Nowadays we can praise fighting teams again. Hear the lion roar his pride, while the men of Morningside follow the blue and white to victory. Roar, lion, roar, and wake the echoes of the Hudson Valley. Fight on to victory evermore, while the sons of Knickerbocker rally round Columbia, Columbia, shouting her name forever. Roar, lion, roar, for alma mater on the Hudson shore. Roar, lion, roar, and wake the echoes of the Hudson Valley. Fight on to victory evermore, while the sons of Knickerbocker rally round Columbia, Columbia, shouting her name forever. Roar, lion, roar, for alma mater on the Hudson shore. Roar, you lion, roar.
So I would just like to say that I had absolutely nothing to do with this, that one of our classmates has a direct link to this group, who shall remain nameless because it's John Connell. And I would, but it was terrific, guys. We really, really appreciate it. And where are you?
Hi, so we're actually in the music building on campus.
Is that Kent Hall still? And not Kent, is that Dodge?
It's
Yes.
Dodge, yes.
Are you in the basement?
We're in the basement.
correct.
You know, when Roger was dean of students, he would have moved you up a couple of floors, I'm sure.
We've been downgraded.
We've been a little downgraded in this
Pull some
time.
strings with the alumni network.
Our whole class really appreciates this, and hopefully for our 50th, when we have Low Rotunda, we'll get you into the Low Rotunda to perform for all of us.
Well, gentlemen, as probably the only music major on the call, I would just like to congratulate the Kingsmen. Nice balance, you guys. Very good.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
So that was our gift, Roger, to you, not because you did this, but for all you've done for us since we entered Columbia in 1972.
Well,
So-
I mean, fortunately, you all got to hear them. It wasn't just for me, it was for everybody. You know, I have to say, seeing them unmasked brought tears to my eyes. I mean, I haven't seen a group of students unmasked for 18 months or 15, you know, I don't know how many, 15 months, whatever it is, since early March of 2020. And you know, some of their singing and the fact they were unmasked brought tears to my eyes. But I want you to think of that first song, not the second verse, which is the one that makes me tear up about, you know, but the first one is essentially an attack on deferred gratification, without which none of them would have gotten into Columbia.
Well, Roger, to make your day, I don't know if you've ever heard this. Do you remember who Pop von Berneth was from the class of 03?
No.
Okay, so he was a Knockham, not to break any secrets or anything, Tom. But the fact of the matter is that since Harry was also that, Harry was in charge of supervising the band. So when Pop von Berneth would go to Baker Field after every home game, he would call Harry and tell him that the band was playing Sans Souci improperly. And Harry said it was at minimum a 15-minute call, that he would sing it to him on the phone and everything else. And it was very interesting.
Yeah.
So
I had my own trials and tribulations as dean of students responding to inquiries about the marching band.
It's been, I'll tell you, this past couple of years, I bet you're glad you're out of that job. That's for sure.
The world's cleverest band.
Well, it's the, you're the world's, my class claimed to be the cleverest class in Columbia's history, but I don't think that had any real weight. But the band is, I love the members of the band. I didn't enjoy always working with the band as a group, stealing things from other campuses. I mean, Moselle, you were in the band. Where are you, Moselle? No wonder you left the call.
No, he's there.
Oh, there you are.
No, I will say nothing about that. I got through one Senate confirmation, without that subject being raised. So, but no, look, the band has always had its challenges, and it's having some challenges right now, and we'll see if it comes back in some form. But in some ways, it was a good representation of the time that we were in.
One of my most fondest memories of college was freshman year. I played trumpet, and that was the only year I was in the band. And we went to Princeton for their homecoming. And I am sure Jim Minter had arranged this. A lot of you know Jim Minter, and he wrote all the scripts when we were freshmen and sophomores. But Jim called up the Anheuser-Busch Company and had them give the entire band styrofoam straw hats. And we went out in Palmer Stadium in Princeton with those styrofoam straw hats. And he said, and all the pregame show was, we just wanted to announce with a little bit of help from the Anheuser-Busch Company that we can look just as ridiculous as the Princeton band, and walked off the field, at which point the Princeton band jumped us and there was a riot on the field. So that's one of my great band memories.
Out of respect for some of the students involved, I'm not going to tell stories about the band's other behavior at Princeton when I was dean of students. That at least was when Harry was in the job. So it was not my problem.
So I wanted to ask a favor of the people who have their pictures. If you have a reason you can't show yourself, as you know, I'm the Columbia College Today columnist, and I'd love to get a shot of as many people as can turn on their cameras, and I'll do a screen grab, and that way maybe they'll actually publish the picture. I don't know if that's going to be worth it or not. So, Sikansky, you can even use, Butler Library as your background if you want. Oh, and Michelle dumped the lion in there instead of herself.
I wanted to let it be purely 1976.
Look at Julia. Well, you guys are well trained. I'm pretty impressed. Oh, look at this. Tom Motley with a Columbia College golf shirt on. I shot 50 for 9 today, Tom. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Here we go. Okay, that's it. I got everybody I needed to get. So Roger, what do you see in the future? What do you see in the future for the Columbia campus? Will Manhattanville impact the undergraduate campus, do you think, at all?
Well, the potential when the business school moves to Manhattanville, which will be, I think in a year or so, Uris Hall will be turned over to the Arts and Sciences, which will provide space that's desperately needed. Whether that goes to help college students is not something I know enough about to know if it'll work out that way. One thing I suggested when those discussions started 5 years ago was that students were probably going to get left out and all the space would go to faculty. But this is the moment when students could get back space that they deserve. Michelle, excuse me for being mildly critical of Columbia right now, but when Lerner Hall was built, it was larger than Ferris Booth Hall so that students would have more space because the size of the college had grown. Ferris Booth Hall didn't have enough space even for the size student body then. And in my opinion, the fact that so much of that space is given over to administrative functions, as worthy as they are, has cheated students in the college. You have part of the health service there, you have administrative offices there regarding space, you have advisors there that at least is legitimately and directly connected to undergraduate student needs. But students should be able to reclaim a larger part of Lerner Hall because space is desperately short. And I'm not sure that's going to happen because students turn over regularly, faculty are there for a long time, and I think they were more effective at putting their dibs in for space in URUS. So we'll see, but I don't think there are going to be significant undergraduate activities up at Manhattanville, if that's what you're asking.
That's what I was asking.
I mean, the question, the real issue is, can moving other things there provide some relief for the space shortage on campus? And for faculty, I think that'll happen. For students, I'm not sure it will happen.
Roger, one of the things I've done over the last 20 years, 25 years, is I've looked back on a lot of historical figures who attended Columbia and what they did since. One of my favorites is Hans Zinser, who was a doctor who graduated in 1898 and found the cure for typhus, and among many other things that he did in his life. But one thing that's interesting, and someone who is not well known because he destroyed all his personal records, was Seth Low, who was mayor of Brooklyn, mayor of New York City, president of Columbia, and then ran Tuskegee University for the last 15 years of his life or so. Do you know Emily Gruber, who graduated 2019 from the college? Because it's interesting, because she actually just compiled a 90-page thesis about Seth Low's life from 1881 to 1903. And for anybody who hasn't read about Seth Low, he established the university in the early 1890s, took it from being just a college to a university. He started the law school, started the medical school, and he had incredibly interesting philosophies about education and university education. And a lot of what Roger's been talking about is reflected in that thesis, and it is available online. I downloaded the PDF, so all of you have my email if you'd be interested in reading it. It's a really fascinating read.
Well, the most important thing Seth Low did is he was responsible for moving the campus from Midtown to Morningside Heights, and gave enough money to get that started from his personal wealth. But he was not always a fan of the college. He didn't start the law school existed long before he was there. The medical school goes back to the 18th century, although it had weird changing affiliations with Columbia over that time. But Seth Low and Nicholas Murray Butler focused much more on building up the graduate and professional schools. I think any fair view would say to the neglect of the college, so that with lots of consequences.
It's something I'd love to talk to you at another point, because it really is interesting, some of the stuff I've discovered. For example, he made an anonymous gift of over $1 million to endow the Barnard College faculty. And there's a lot of things he did do that were very beneficial to undergraduate education.
Well, I mean, it would require a longer conversation.
Right, agreed.
For most of the 20th century, the fact is that there was more attention to the graduate and professional schools at Columbia than there was to the college.
True.
And one result of that, I mean, this is a short sound bite that I can say in this amount of time. In 1900, Columbia, Harvard, Yale, and Princeton had roughly the same endowment size. Obviously, it's dramatically different now, that they are much richer than we are. And You could say some of it had to do with investment decisions over the course of the 20th century, possibly. But much of it had to do with the fact that Harvard, Yale, and Princeton cultivated their colleges in a way Columbia did not. Columbia provided a better intellectual experience in the 20th century for its undergraduates than those three places did. But they nurtured undergraduate life in a different way because they were certainly Princeton was very uninterested in building up graduate and professional schools. And Harvard and Yale did it somewhat less than we did, with less emphasis. And I think that's one of the consequences. Your financial strength as an institution is largely going to be based on your undergraduate alumni. And that's not what Columbia did in the 20th century. So I think you need to look more carefully at what Seth Low and Nicholas Murray Butler did. They weren't just.
I just to agree with you, but disagree, I wouldn't put them in a pair. There's a big difference between Seth Low and Nicholas Murray Butler, for sure. So.
Yeah, Seth Low knew when to leave as president, and Nicholas Murray Butler didn't. Nicholas Murray Butler's main educational idea in his 43 years as president, his main educational idea for undergraduate study was that the college should be reduced to a 2-year school because undergraduate education was a waste of time. He just wanted to have the college reduced to 2 years and have everybody go on to professional school after that. That was not a healthy thing at Columbia. It didn't happen, but that's what he wanted to do. So I have some contrary views about
I understand
historical issues, but I look forward to reading what the student wrote.
I'll shoot you the PDF. Roger, we cannot thank you enough. Moselle, thank you for facilitating this and laying the groundwork. Steve, great introduction. John Connell, as usual, thank you. For the Kingsmen especially. Michelle, we're over time. Do you have anything you want to add to the class besides give money, and if you can afford John Jay, make yourselves a John Jay this year?
I'm not the fundraising person, but I'm sure you'll be getting an email. But thank you to everyone for joining. For anyone who might have missed it from your class, the recording of this will be up on the website in the next 2 days, so that'll be accessible to everyone else. And just thank you all.
Tom Motley, you have to come up to Jersey City and play the Skyway Golf Course in the shadow of the Pulaski Skyway. You'll love it. I'll send you a link to the course. You'll love this course. It's only 9 holes. It's perfect for our age.
Yeah, and one of the things we've been talking about as well is, as soon as we can, kind of be on campus, is try to get the class together in person at some event. I can't wait another 5 years to see you guys. I want to see you, as soon as possible. And we'll be focusing on that.
Just a reminder, homecoming is October 16th, so maybe we can shoot for the Thursday night prior at V&T's. So we'll see what happens. And Roger, you will definitely be invited. And we'll switch it to symposium if you'd rather go to symposium.
I'm going for the company, not the food.
Yeah.
But this was great. I want to thank, again, great seeing everybody. Dean Lehecka, thank you very much. This has just been, a really great evening.